We are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Bob Carver, who's a principal cybersecurity threat intelligence and analytics at Verizon. Thanks very much, Bob, for joining me. Much appreciated. How are you?
Doing great, David. How are you? Hey, a pleasure to be here.
You know, we were geeking out before I pressed record about your equipment. So you do this all the time, and you're very, very prolific in the cyberspace. With articles, speaking engagements. So this comes naturally for you. And I know you're very busy, so I really appreciate you coming on board and doing this and giving back to the community. So before we get started, kind of my typical question, how did you get started in cybersecurity? How did you end up, in such a high presence in the cyberspace?
Sure. I was a career changer, actually. I did commercial real estate development and that sort of thing. And I decided at one time, I said, I'm at the end of the line of this. I'm tired of this boom bust in the real estate market. Went back to grad school, got a master's degree in information systems management. But my first security project was building a key management system. It was where it develops encryption keys, and it was used by a major financial institution to transfer billions of dollars between different banks. So that was my first project, and then I would just volunteer for different projects.
So let me double click on a couple of things you mentioned.
Sure.
First of all, it's so cool, and I think you it was a good thing you escaped. I think cybersecurity is much more stable. In fact, it seems like we're on the verge of another cycle in the real estate market. So if you were, hypothetically speaking, continuing that path, you would encounter yet another, lull in the market. And then double click on the, you taking a degree. So again, what made you pick that particular topic? And then I would say for the first engagement, doing something as difficult as that, you didn't just jump off the deep end. You went over all the way to the top and then jumped.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, it was actually, what was interesting, it was using a Dell PC, I think at the time, but loading embedded Unix on it and then putting the vendor's application on top of that, and configuring it and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a little bit of the deep end. It was not like I was just loading Windows somewhere or something.
And at a time, today I feel like there's a lot of materials out there that's available for you. If you wanted to take a look, all you have to do is look up, do Google search, YouTube, and so on. But back then,
no, it was a lot harder. It was a lot harder.
A lot harder.
You had to dig. You had to really dig to find things, and then, hopefully you would find some person that maybe had done it before, or at least part of what you were trying to do before. And
it was a lot of RTFM, right?
Oh yeah.
Ethic manual.
All that. Exactly. So yeah, it wasn't easy. There was one time there was a application that was broken, and I said, well, you got any documentation or anything on this? And they said, no. And it's like, I think this is where the application is. And then they said, well, I think it runs on this operating system. And it's like, you just had to figure it out, And wow. It wasn't straightforward.
And you always have, that
just,
inherent,
30-minute project. It was several days trying to figure out which one is up and trying to put it together. And that's sort of the same thing. When new security things happen, it's the same thing. You got to figure out what's going on. What are the bad guys doing? Whether it's nation state or cyber criminals, you got to sort of turn it inside out, upside down, and figure out what's going on. So
were you always curious around technology? Was it inherent? Like, did you grow up around technology? And
I didn't. Well. I've been around a while, so I programmed a mainframe a long time ago.
Wow! So you actually have the hands-on experience.
Fortran, I did Fortran many years ago.
And that was before the real estate?
That was before real estate, yeah.
Wow! So you kind of came. So really,
yeah.
Okay, you came back to,
and then I started seeing, the more client server type technology coming into place, and Windows and all that. So that was like, I saw that coming in, and I said, well, this is interesting. This is better than that mainframe stuff. And I was the logic guy. I mean, whenever we teamed up, I was sort of like the guy that wrote all the logic, but then I would screw up the parentheses and the periods and the commas and everything and the coding. And it's like, you guys, because if I stayed in coding, I probably would have written my own program, like they came out later with Python and stuff like that. I probably would have and made up my own rules because I said, I don't like that rule. I'd do it this way. I don't like to play.
It's amazing. It's amazing what's in some of that code, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I've had a chance to talk to somebody who works for a big company, does review for code, like open source and so on before buying a company and so on. And he was telling me one time they just found the whole Tetris source code inside some code. Great. Just because I guess the developer was goofing around and said, okay, I'm going to put the entire Tetris code in there and see if somebody. But that was like 15 years ago.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it was, the code was in there for 15 years before somebody discovered that.
I know there's a guy. Well, I know several, but one that I talk to about once every week or two. That's all he does is review source code and stuff, and then look for backdoors and different malicious malware and that sort of thing. But I used to reverse malware or reverse different types of code and pop it open and look and see what was going on, and I found some interesting things. So.
That's what I think people don't realize that what's the amount of lines of code that, a whole world runs around. Yeah. It's billions upon billions. Just what, Windows has a couple billion lines of code, something like that. So our whole society is based on, lines and lines and lines of code. And the majority, if not, like the lion's share of it has not been really reviewed at all. Right. And, somebody wrote it and then, libraries upon libraries upon libraries because everything's being reused. And I think that's also from, touching on cybersecurity. It leaves a lot of vulnerable, areas.
I mean, a lot of these libraries are just on GitHub and people don't want to rewrite, reinvent the wheel every time. So they say, oh, well, this library will do what I need to do. And so they just throw it into their code and connect it all together and everything, quote unquote, is fine. And of course, now we hear about every week or two, this particular library, Python library or C library or whatever, has some sort of malicious code or vulnerability into it that people are taking advantage of.
And then this thing leads to like the log4j, log4s type of things that by the way, this is what I don't understand. Bob, I'd like to ask you this question. Like, every time it's almost like, people call it they call the SolarWinds, like the atom bomb of cyber, and then log4j. And then, people don't come home for the weekend because they're working on patching or they work, but nothing really happens. The world is not, ended.
Right.
But and we're waiting because of the next atom bomb from a cybersecurity perspective. So what's happening? Why are we taking it so seriously? But then really,
I think some of these people that are in the front lines, they just get burned out. I mean, it's like being, the people that are firemen and policemen, they usually are start in their early 20s and then they retire at early 40s usually. Because otherwise they get fried, they get burned out, especially if they're working in a major city. And it's the same thing if they're doing some, major work in cybersecurity. A lot of times it's so intense, you're good for a certain amount of time. And then it's like, just like me. I mean, I was employee number one for a Fortune 20 company to start the security monitoring incident response. And of course, at the beginning, they don't give you any budget for anything. You say, you're lucky if you hire one guy. And it's like you're doing later, 10, 15 years later, there's 20 or 30 guys doing the same thing that you did at the beginning. And, and you can't do that 20 hours a day forever, or even if it's 10 or 12 hours a day. And if it's like super, super intense, it's like you're going, it's like you're going 100 miles an hour on a 60 or 70 mile an hour road. And
so cybersecurity burnout is real.
Oh,
That's what he's saying.
It's definitely real. And you hear different quotes. You've probably seen some of the articles out there, but they're saying 30%, 40%, 50%, 60% of people considering a whole new different type of career because they're getting fried. There's too much. And
then the flip side of that is that there's a lot of people that want to get into cybersecurity and yet they've and I've seen people from all walks of life and with very diverse backgrounds, academically and just and otherwise, and they do really well. It's just that it's very tough to get over the hump. Like at the beginning of it.
Getting your foot in the door, and that's one of the things. I came into it like in the very late 90s, early 2000s. So what I did, there wasn't a ton of dedicated people in corporations then. It was more government and military and that sort of thing. And so what I did is I volunteered for security projects like that encryption project, the Key Management Center. I volunteered to do that. And that's like, well, let me try that.
Do you know what you're getting yourself into?
Yeah,
like that?
Yeah. And it wasn't so bad, really. I wasn't under attack. It wasn't, all the communications were on private lines. They didn't go through the internet or anything. They were. But
still, but I would be just scared from the complexity of it all. It's not
that's true.
You know what I mean? Because it's almost you're putting yourself out there, and if your name attached to something that might not be successful, especially the large corporation, you're like, you're not setting yourself well for success.
What happened to that $100 million transfer today? How come it didn't go through right? And the money's
Bob,
gone.
Come see me in my office.
We have to have a talk.
But it's so complex. It's probably hard. It was. Even the people that you reported to probably didn't have a clue what you were doing. That's the thing, at the time, right? The complexity is definitely there.
There's a lot of times, where somebody has a 10,000-foot view, they just say, well, just do it. What's the problem? It's like easy to say that in, 5 or 10 seconds. But to actually do it could take many days.
So it's funny because I always ask people that are doing cyber for a living. It's like, how do you explain what it is that you do to others that don't come from that space?
It's not easy. Yeah, I mean, you have to do little piecemeal, little bits and pieces. Tell a story, and I think that's a lot of it is learning how to tell a story.
That's right.
I mean, some of the earliest security that I was doing. Well, one of the projects I volunteered for was to help forward intrusion detection events to called the mother of all managers. That was like pre-SIM days, the SIM, like the Splunks and, all those type of things. They took all sorts of alarms that were more for operational alarms, like, the fan's gone bad or the power supply's gone bad or something's, not working right on this router or firewall or, that sort of thing. Where intrusion detection events, we had to actually make a different section for this mother of all managers just for security events. And the first events were intrusion detection events, at least in my situation.
And it's just so many waves, right? So we're talking about the hype cycle, right? So, you mentioned intrusion prevention, detection, then prevention, then there was orchestration. I mean, it's just so many of them. And now it's we're all the zero trust more. I mean,
XDR, SOAR.
And you've seen all those. So when you see it coming, because you're in a position to really see what's out there. You're a very senior guy working for a large company, so you probably get a lot of people that are, picking your brain to see if they're doing is right. What's your take on it? How do we deal with these cycles? And then are you're talking about burn rate, right? So are cybersecurity professionals kind of burnt out from all these ever-ending, never-ending cycles?
It's difficult, and of course, getting the budget and then if you're working for a large corporation, you have to get everybody on board. You have to get your manager on board. Then you have to get the people that actually have the pocketbook on board. And so a lot of times it may have to go through multiple levels of convincing everybody what to do. And it's like, I had one project that was a multi-million-dollar project. It took like 8 years. 8 years.
No, I believe it.
But I eventually got it through, and it's proven to, it did. I can't go into great detail, but it proved to be, well worth it in the long run.
But do you find that the cycles are shrinking a little bit? Like, if you could do firewalls for 10 years, and then MDM was like around for about 2, and then now, I mean, it seems like the cycles are shrinking.
They are, but then, do you jump on a certain cycle or not? You have to decide whether is that going to be a flash in the pan, or is it going to be something is for the long haul. And that's where you have to decide. And it's not always easy a process. A lot of times I see things years down the road at times, but it takes often years to convince, especially if it's a multi-million-dollar project. It can take years to get that communicated and understood, and also to have the budget available too, because sometimes the budget that it was once dedicated for one item, all of a sudden another item becomes a higher priority, and all of a sudden that bucket of money shifts somewhere else, and you go, wait a minute, I want it over here. It's like, no, we got to do it over here. It's like, okay. Anyway, you just have to deal with that. It's just one of those things.
So is the enterprise better at basically just getting like point solution patching until I think they get more strategy or like holistic view? Because it seems like by the time they 8 years is a long time, but even 2 years. Yeah. I mean, look what happened in the last 2 years. Sure. I mean, the environment really changed. By the time you deploy it, the time that you pick a project, have it budgeted. Mm-hmm. Look at technologies out there, deploy, and so on. It's already like gone. Like you probably don't need it anymore.
It can be. It's not always that way. That project that I was talking about is still in place and still going 100% strong.
Is it related to the mainframe?
No, not at all.
Because that's, if I'll double click on that one. I'll talk to you about mainframe security.
No, but it's still valuable, and I think it will be valuable. It's protecting against a lot of different bad things, phishing and botnets and malware and on and on and on. So,
I think that there's quite a bit of noise now within the industry. There's thousands of vendors all pitching very similar ideas.
And unfortunately, there is already a start of consolidation, and I think there's been talk about consolidation for quite some time. And the sad part is there's sometimes some very good vendors out there, and they may just not have the marketing or the momentum. It takes a while to build momentum for these companies to be able to get their word out and to be able to, start having paying customers and that sort of thing. So
I think
that's
they're looking
sad
for
when
the
you
early
have,
adopters.
some really good technology. Hopefully, in some of those cases, their technology may be bought up by somebody larger that can be able to move it forward. But then, on the other hand, sometimes technology gets bought up, and then they sort of gut some of the original staff that was actually making all that technology happen and move forward and upward, and then they're resting on their laurels, and then that technology. And I've seen this. Some technology that I've purchased in the past that was very good at the very beginning, and then over time it gradually just went down.
Bob, all you have to do is buy the new stuff that the same people that left the company created a new company with the same or similar, very similar technology, and they just renamed the technology, added a couple of features, and then they go to market again.
I won't go into great detail.
I know I'm cynical, but
there's one company that I approached them 2 or 3 times, and I gave them an idea that says you need to add this to your repertoire to help detect things, and they just sort of blew it off, and two companies spun off of that big company, and they started with the idea that I gave them.
Did he give it credit for it, or was it not completely?
I don't think so, but they liked the idea. But I know one of them just didn't have enough funding to keep out. The other one I haven't kept up with to know. But there are some companies that the same idea that come up. And I probably should have kept it to myself and say, hey, I'm going to quit, get some funding, get a patent, and do it myself. But
it seems now the barrier to entry were much lower as cybersecurity, because all you have to do is just get get funding, and we've seen some of the evaluations were off the charts lately.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think traditionally it was 10 to 15x, but we've seen as high as 100,
sure.
150x.
Oh yeah,
which is unsustainable.
Yes.
On all fronts.
Absolutely, especially when you have a stock market that's happening today.
Right. So, but maybe that's going to, create some consolidation, and it's going to bring down, just like you talked about the real estate market. I think it ebbs and flows in the security market as well.
Absolutely. I agree.
So you mentioned something that you look at technologies, all the time, mm-hmm. right? New technologies and so on. And you see that from a practitioner standpoint, but also from somebody who works at a larger business. Mm-hmm. And it's one thing to solve an issue for 50 endpoints, 100 endpoints, but start extrapolate. All of a sudden, you start seeing like some major issues, and where I'm going with it.
130 million customers or more.
So when you look at technologies, like at one point you look at it, and they do like the dog and pony show, mm-hmm. where they show you the flashing lights, the snazzy interface, sure. and the GUI and all that stuff. At one point in time, you say, okay, this is feasible. This is something I'd like to see. Right. Going to the next step, right. Or at what point in time you cut it off and say, okay, you come back to us when go back to the drawing board and let's look at it again. Right. Sometimes.
Boy, that's not an easy question to answer, because there's
nobody says it's going to be easy, Bob. And by the way, it's completely unscripted. Yeah. So whatever you say, it's all good. 1,000
different interpolations of things that could happen and go on all during this time. I think one of the things that I can distill it down to, though, whatever the vendor tells you, don't trust it 100%. I mean, you might like the idea, but then test it. And I've done that before. And I had a vendor one time sort of pat me on the head, and I said, well, maybe you just don't know how to use it right, or you don't have enough experience or whatever. I mean, they were treating me like somebody that was like a few years out of school or something. And it's like, you don't understand. I says, I've done this for huge companies, and
I can't sense it went well.
No. And I said, okay, we'll see. And so
did you develop a sixth sense though? Like,
Yeah. And that's very interesting that you say that, because I've even told some of my management that before. They want me to do the logical part only and not the intuitive. And I said, you have to have sort of a balance. If you don't, that logic is somewhere down the line. The bad guys are just going to change the whole game, and that logic is going to shot. You're going to have to rebuild it from scratch. So you have to have the other side, the intuitive side, to just like, okay, what do we do next? And I know that sounds sort of crazy for somebody that may be coming from a pure scientific background, but a lot of these guys, like Teslas and the Edisons and stuff like that, a lot of times they would stuff would come up in their dreams or from a nap or something, and all of a sudden the idea would come into their head, and then they would start experimenting with it. But I do this sort of the same thing when I do threat hunting. I thought, I think I need to look for X, Y, and Z today instead of like A, B, and C, and so I throw it together, and I look for patterns, and sometimes I find things, and sometimes, like you go fishing, find nothing, but other times it's like, whoa, what is this? So anyway, I don't know if that helps.
In artificial intelligence, it sounds almost like a little bit of a fuzzy logic.
Yeah, it is. I call it intuitive fuzzy logic. Yes, absolutely. But if you do just a strict, if then whatever, a very logical, traditional, what do you call it when you fork off, to different patterns,
Yeah, decision tree.
You gotta change it up, and sometimes do something that seems like totally out of bounds.
Do you think that's why AI would never truly displace us because we're talking about also creativity.
Mm-hmm.
You specifically, we're creative about threat hunting, and a lot of creativity is like it comes in you and when
right.
when you sleep on it, and you wake up and you're like, oh, I have this idea. And AI and machines don't have that. They just use like large data sets.
I still think it's going to be a combination, the combination of AI and humans together. AI by itself may go off on a tangent somewhere and not find what you want. You got to help it out a little bit. There may be a time, but I don't see that in the real near future.
Yeah, so I asked somebody, who created an AI assistant to, for the SOC analysts, to ask whether the last analyst has been born already.
Yeah.
And he said no. He said, he's been very political about it. I think eventually, or at least it's going to be like a manager of managers, where you're going to have an analyst that doing a lot more work at a much higher level, but you get rid of a lot of the
low level guys. Yeah. When you, I see that too. What they call first level SOC guys, if they don't have the capability to think at higher and higher levels, and also integrate possibly with different types of machine learning or deep learning, that sort of thing. A lot of their,
maybe they don't have to. Maybe they can just become that 1.5 or 2 levels, but by having a assistant from a machine, right?
They'll have to learn to be able to do that. If they're just waiting for something just to abracadabra show up in their face and then go by a script, then that's going to be not very good for your career in the long run.
So Bob, you mentioned like it was an example of like how not to to work with somebody like yourself who's been there, done that, and has the expertise. But what's the kind of the positive spin-off at, like, if somebody really wanted to, for example, work with somebody like yourself, when they want to pitch you the technology, and what are the key element, maybe like 2 or 3 key points that you are specifically looking for in terms of evaluating technology?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things would be and it's got to work. It's got to work. It's got to work. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's got to really work, not just fake it. But it just got to solve a problem that I currently have, and that can change definitely from year to year, if not month to month sometimes. So there's sometimes people want to pitch me something and it's like totally way out of what I'm doing right now, and it's like, well, it's not my area.
But Bob, to tell you it's a problem I didn't know you had.
Yeah, well, that can happen sometimes too. Or we have already have other alternatives that solve that issue. That happens in larger companies too. There's a lot of the small companies want to come in and do something that we already have a whole department that does that. Whether it's vulnerability testing or risk management with, say, like NIST or something like that. And it's like, we also have a consulting company that does that too. And they're your competitor, and they're probably a lot bigger than what you are right now. So, it's anyway.
I think it's part of doing homework, though.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is something that could have been, it's public domain.
They need to do their homework. No doubt.
And how much do you pay attention to, like, the the analysts, the different analyst groups and reports?
Like maybe
and so
Gartner and Forrester's and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do. I read their stuff and then I decide whether it's right on the money or it's not really appropriate for what I'm dealing with at the moment. So I want to hear different opinions. And well, it's just like, everybody, like, sort of implying what you implied a little bit earlier about AI. Some people almost feel like AI is going to be the silver bullet for everything. And it's like, well, there are no silver bullets right now. Maybe one of these days, but I can't see it anytime in the near future. But yes.
And AI is supposed to be, the whole definition of AI is for it to be aware. And there's nothing right now. I mean, there's supposedly some
Yeah.
Well,
there was one guy working at Google that said he had a sentient AI happening over in Google, and Google, I don't know. The rumor was that they let him go when they said that the AI was sentient, a sentient being.
maybe it wasn't real AI. It was like AI, artificial intelligence.
Who knows? I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. So
I think a lot of time is really not. They interchangeably use AI and machine learning, or even lower than that. What is the standard deviation?
Yeah.
Like, okay, look at the baseline and what's
sure. Yeah, I mean, I had statistics, 4 semesters of statistics. So, yeah, there's
same here. But it's really interesting because it's like it's a glorifying machine learning and something that's fairly simple to understand to actually sell and part of the marketing, materials is that it's AI driven, and, and even use that in the name .ai,
anyway, I think AI is a good thing. Machine learning and deep learning are really what's there in reality. I don't think we're going to have any sentient beings working on cybersecurity in the next year or two, but.
And what about the adversaries are also making development?
Yeah,
so it's a race for both these people.
I think the attack's already starting to happen with machine learning, and
talk to me about that. What have you seen? Because that's a really fascinating topic where the automating using iterative AI.
It happened right now, and I don't think we're seeing a lot of it yet, but people are testing it here and there, and quite often it's a test for like, I think, minutes at a time, and then it goes away, because they don't want people to catch on too much. But they're looking for vulnerabilities. They're looking at everything possible, enumeration of the systems, the endpoints, whatever's visible to wherever the adversary is located. And then they're going to start hitting it as fast as possible based upon all of the vulnerabilities and the enumeration of the systems that they see. And basically it says, oh, you got this, and this. And it's like, okay, I'm going to hit you with this, and this. Because, where they just sort of match up the vulnerabilities with the attacks.
So basically we're going to have machine protecting us and machine attacking us. And I think that's done today in a lot of different areas. So I can tell you, for example, that a lot of content online is being generated by AI. So meaning like there's a lot of blog articles and so on.
Yes.
And it's all for Google SEO to read it because nobody else reads it. So we're basically having text has been written by machines for machine to read it.
And the bots on Twitter and all the other, Facebook and all those. And
so what's the difference between what we're doing is essentially we have algorithms, machines that are looking for vulnerabilities and protecting the organization. And on the other side, you have machines that are looking to ways to attack us. And it's going to be like, who does better programming?
Who has the best machine learning and deep learning?
And I know that there's a race for that, right? I mean, the state.
Absolutely.
Don't we? I think that there's a side back in the 60s, 70s. It was the the race to space, right? I think now we're racing towards
quantum computing, AI, all that.
Yeah, the Star Wars is now becoming cyber wars, right?
There's a race for the quantum encryption for critical systems right now.
Where do you feel that that's a real thing? Do you think that we'll get to the point where, because what people don't realize again is that the entire internet is based upon shared secrets, and if you have the ability to decrypt those, the whole internet is broken very quickly.
Well, that's where gradually quantum encryption has to be rolled out in critical infrastructures, and
that's worse than Y2K. Y2K was nothing.
They have to prioritize where it gets rolled out first and second and third. But I think that's where we're going to go. I think the internet, the whole internet will be based on quantum encryption.
And And it's way worse than Y2K. Y2K was all about just the one day.
Oh yeah.
Imagine like replacing
It's
encryption.
I mean, just rolling out PKI for the router for router handoffs. That was probably a major thing. I mean, usually, in situations, larger companies probably have the staff to do that, but then the smaller ones, it's tougher to have the staff to be able to make that happen. You almost have to have, because everybody in the entire network, every network you touch has to be able to upgrade their system so they have the PKI in place. Eventually, the same will happen when encryption and when quantum encryption takes place.
Bob, it just means job security for a lot of people. I think,
I don't know.
the next...
I don't know. There's probably a lot of us that they're just going to say, you can't retire. You got to keep on working.
It's all, coming back to the mainframe, and I keep bringing it up because you have the experience,
sure.
right? I did a lot of people that they had to come back because no one really knew COBOL, right? And I had to program. And so they had to bring these like older developers that wanted to retire. So you can't retire,
There's, well, I won't say she's a young woman anymore, but there was at one time a younger woman many years ago. And she said, well, what should I do? She was courses she would take and that sort of thing. And I said, and this was a little after Y2K took place. I said, you realize there's going to be tons of people that manage these mainframes that are still not going to go away, that are about ready to retire or they're retiring right now. And you're going to be graduated from school the next year or two. Your buddies, you're going to be able to make another 15, 20 grand more than your friends right out of the bat because they don't have enough people because everybody's retiring once Y2K was over. And
the scarcity is real for sure.
And she's done really well. And I'm pretty sure she's in some sort of management position overseeing a mainframe at a major company right now.
And this is really interesting because isn't it like, security by obscurity a little bit because these mainframes are, no one knows how to program and therefore it's very difficult to hack. I mean, because they're just, there's not, how can you test whether a vulnerability exists? Yeah,
well, there are a few people out there, but less. More people learn on Windows and Linux and Unix and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So, and why can't the banks remove some of those? Like, why is it still like a thing? Why can't it just upgrade?
There's still big iron, but one thing that it has, I did see that, IBM in the last several years have been moving Linux operating systems to mainframes. So that was sort of interesting. I'm definitely not an expert in that area, but I thought that was very interesting that they were moving Linux operating systems to their big mainframes. And companies that have that require huge processing power, like entire U.S. databases on certain things or huge financial transactions, they have to have that type of horsepower to be able to make things happen.
Well, don't they like just spin off an Azure or an AWS or Google Cloud instance and just get it off to the races?
They could. I guess it depends. Although I don't know about you, but I see every week or two Azure, AWS. Anyway, I won't go. Clouds occasionally having hiccups and services be not working for hours at a time.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I think that, we're moving so fast. I mean, this industry is moving so quickly. It just reminds me, and I've talked about this before, where cars didn't have seat belts when they were exceeding 100 miles an hour. Because there were the advancement in car manufacturing and the technology was way faster than the security controls over it. Are we in the same way? I mean, we start seeing more controls. We start seeing insurance also companies, and we talk about the insurance area, like more companies require, for example, certain threshold of security in order for them to get insurance. And it reminds me of almost like the car. You can't insure a car if it doesn't have the security control. I wrote an article,
I don't know when it was, I think it was a couple of years ago, and I talked about will insurance companies dictate your risk management program or something similar to that type of title. And I think we're going to see more and more on that. I mean, one of the things that I was told about 12 months ago or something, that if insurance companies find out you have a major breach and you did not have multi-factor authentication on those key systems that got breached, your premiums would go up substantially after that, one. And two, they're going to require you to have multi-factor authentication on those key systems going forward on those platforms. Otherwise, they're just not going to insure you at all. So it's a double whammy, basic levels. Higher premiums and requiring to put those type of protections in place. So I think we're going to see more and more of that. They haven't got to the point where it's, you have to use vendor XYZ for your firewalls. You have to use this and treat, they're not going there yet, but they're looking for definite things in your risk management program where you didn't really follow through where you should have.
Yeah, and they have to show, right? They have to show that they've done the minimum or the requirement to secure. Sure. So meaning that they didn't leave the door open when they left the house.
And the other thing is if people don't start looking at their contracts for insurance, cyber insurance, you better have a security professional and probably an attorney look at it, because there's probably some loopholes on there where if you don't do X, Y, and Z, it's sorry, you don't get paid. And it may be written in such a subtle way that it might not be caught by somebody that's not an expert in that area.
Yeah, there was a monumental court decision recently, actually, about Merck with actually winning the claim. Right, it was over $1 billion because they, and I guess insurance was saying it was. Act of like a
force
state
majeure or act of God or whatever, something like that, or act of war like that, or something like that.
Act of war, yeah, exactly. And that also, I mean, granted, it's probably going to continue in court for the next 10 years. So the way somebody's going to appeal because that's a large sum of money. But aside from that, it's really puts, as you mentioned, because there's a lot of ambiguity in how you write these contracts, and I don't think there's a standardization, like in terms of how there's a contract for, coming back to real estate, there's a contract for real estate. There's no contract for covering for cyber insurance, is it?
I don't think so. I don't consider myself an expert in that area, but I'm pretty sure that the contracts are very similar, but I think they have their own fine print and various clauses.
So let me ask you this, switch gears a little bit here. You had the opportunity to talk to some world leaders in different occasions and some very, very senior people, which is pretty amazing because that's probably an experience not a lot of us had. I wanted to ask you, what is, at that level, what's their interest in cyber? What is kind of like, what are they worried about? Because I know what I'm worried about as a citizen, but I mean, they're looking at a much wider, preview of where the world is going.
Well, like the International Monetary Fund, they're looking at potential collapse of nations' economies. And
that's pretty big.
They're looking at it from a very serious standpoint, not really from a make-believe standpoint, but like what would happen if all of a sudden the banks were shut down and there was bank holidays, bank runs, ATMs shut down, on and on and on. And what, how long would you last?
So that's like what you just described was the, a gold bug wet dream.
Yeah.
All the people that are hoarding gold and precious metals. I mean, that's all they talk about. The only thing for me is that when I watch some of these folks and I see the video was from 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and it's still the same video. I mean, granted, it may be right one day, but
but you know what? I tell you, I have a friend that went to school at Princeton in economics, very, very smart guy, and he says, "What happens when all these guys got a pile of gold?" He said, "You can't eat gold. you can't fill up your car with gold and make it drive down the road. It's like, what is it? What is the true value of gold if everything else, if you need food and you need gasoline to operate your vehicle? So,
well, I think the idea is to barter,
yeah,
use that for, as a means to acquire other types of
no doubt. I understand the logic behind the gold bugs, but also what he's saying, that really it comes down to something that you really need. Gold, you're not going to eat, and you're not going to have your car run off of it. You're not going to have electricity to run your, the gold. You can't just plug it into to your power system and have it run.
Well, you can shave it and go down the street, and maybe somebody else has stored a bunch of tuna cans. We'll be able to trade for a couple of shaves.
That's what you hope, at least. You hope they need.
Yeah.
You hope they need gold more than they need their tuna.
So how, all joking aside,
Yes.
Bob, like, how real is, because, we've seen some, some movies, some scenarios where maybe a smaller scale. Listen, they're showing Don't Look Up, the movie about the asteroid thing.
Sure.
I don't know if they're, if that's preparing us for something, or,
what's the
knows?
the movie, Die Hard, the one that had the fire sale? That's the one that always pops to my mind. But there are others too. There's others too.
Yeah. So how real is that? And I'm sure somebody's calculating the odds associated with it, because there's actuaries out there that probably has a table on one side, the end of the world, the other one is everything's okay.
Gosh, you know what? 2 years ago, when I was talking to some folks that were experts in the industry, they really didn't have enough actuarial information to even come up with a guess.
How's it possible?
A guess. Now,
because
they're starting, I think, little by little, they're starting to. I haven't been able to talk to anybody in the last few months to see where they are, but definitely 2 years ago, they weren't even close.
But it's so interesting, because there are actuary tables for the odds of you walking down the street in New York City and falling through a gutter.
Right, exactly.
They're, for somebody as obscure, there's a statistic.
The problem is, though, there's so many different things that could happen. Some of the things that are going to happen in cybersecurity that happen next year or the year after haven't even happened yet. So how are they going to do any actual aerial tables on something that hasn't even happened yet?
Can they run, the smart people running simulations? Can they do that? Just running
there are
scenarios
people working on that right now. I know there's lots of people. They've hired people just to do that type of work. But right now, that's one of the worst areas that they have on being able to predict in the insurance industry. So I'm hoping to see better things. But one of the things that's come out in the last year was that multi-factor authentication. That was
no way, something as simple.
Major.
Something as simple as that.
Major. Really? Major. That was major. Like I said, if somebody's system got hacked and they didn't have the MFA in place, it would cost them a lot for their next policy. An extra premium over the normal premium, and then they would have to have it in place, and boy, God forbid, if you say you have something in place and you don't have it in place, forget it. You're totally out.
But Bob, this is super interesting, because, and if you don't mind, we'll kind of dive into that. First of all, there are companies out there looking to, completely displace shared secrets. So get rid of all that. That's number one,
sure.
Which hopefully will, even, FIDO standards and Microsoft is, and all the Apple and so on adopting this. But on the other end, it's really interesting, because we were always talking about, we're talking about some technologies that are kind of high end, in the sense that they're way down the path of securing a company, if it's a continuum. But what we're talking about is a lot of companies don't even have the baseline associated with reducing risk. MFA should be completely standard. Yeah. So how come we're still don't have the basics associated with securing the company, the enterprise?
I think it's
2022.
It's priorities. It's a matter of prioritization. And a lot of times companies are looking, it's like, okay, we got to make our next quarter's bottom line, for profits or for, income, and the focus a lot of times ends up being on that, and then sometimes it takes away from dealing with those risks. And in smaller companies, quite often, and I've seen this happen many times before, where the IT guy is also doing security. And a lot of those guys are already spread thin just doing the IT part. And then if you add the security on top of that, it's like he's going to be doing it between midnight and 6 a.m. when he should be sleeping.
But as an executive, you should be able to see some of the statistics associated with a breach or something.
Yes.
I mean, the odds are you're not going to be in business after 3 years, right? I mean,
sure.
So if I was an executive, I would be holy, let's fix become a baseline.
Especially even smaller companies, but larger companies, I think most of the time they can take a hit on a breach and they'll survive. But smaller companies, I've heard one of the latest statistics I saw from one group said 60% were out of business after a major breach. So what are you talking,
60%, 60.
After 6 months, they just couldn't, recover.
That's a crazy number right there.
There's somebody I know, I won't name the industry, but there was a certain industry, and the company, typically would have, 10 to 100 employees. And a friend of mine that's in this industry told me that 2 of their competitors went out of business, and it was because of, I think one of them was definitely ransomware. The other one was a breach of some sort. I don't know if it was ransomware or not. And they simply didn't recover. And it was the same thing. It was they tried to hang on for a good 6 months or so, but eventually they just couldn't get everything back together again because their computers were so destroyed and they didn't have good enough backups on systems. And you probably had one or two poor guys that were trying to run the whole operation all by themselves, and it was too much. It was too much. And they went out of business. And of course, it was good for the company that was left standing, but the 2 that were out of business, I mean, all those employees end up.
They had the pick of the litter with all the employees that were let go afterwards.
Exactly. They had to find a new job.
But what's interesting as well is that, it's a matter of national security. What you just described between 10 and 100 employees, that's the backbone of the U.S. economy.
Absolutely.
So it's in our collective best interest, to elevate the risk, protection for all of those businesses. Because listen, 100 employees, they all let go. Imagine it probably impacts 1,000 people because these people have families, they have relatives, that people. I mean, it's just the impact is tremendous, right? So how do we get that? Collectively get the idea that they have to start elevating. And I know it's a big question.
It's a big question. And it is an education thing. I think the Small Business Administration is attempting to do stuff like that. I know I had somebody approach me from them a while back. But, a lot of these people that are starting small businesses, they're working long days just to try to keep the doors open and do regular operations, and security is just unfortunately an afterthought. And it's sad. A lot of these people need to figure out how to be able to, hire somebody on a part-time basis or something. There's some managed service providers, and there's different levels of managed security that can be purchased by small businesses too, where at least somebody is watching the fort from the security standpoint, at least part-time, instead of nobody doing it. And what's interesting too, you'll see, different things, whether it's, computers or the phones or firewalls or stuff. And you say, oh, these items are under attack now. But then sometimes they'll say, oh, well, this vulnerability is from 2020 or 2019. It's like nobody updated anything for that many years, Yeah.
And sometimes it's really interesting. Sometimes they update it and they patch it. And no one closed the loop on it. It's falsely claimed that it's been patched, and then you still have the vulnerabilities. And a lot of times it's also a CVE number 55, not the top 10 at all. That it's or the supply chain.
Sure.
Right? We're talking about supply chain, risk associated with these.
Exactly. And
And what about?
Go ahead.
So go ahead.
No,
I was just saying, like you're right. I mean, there's the they're so busy. So should the government mandate using compliance requirements?
I think it depends on. It's hard. That's a hard thing. Unfortunately, I tell you what the deal is. The problem is there's a lot of businesses that won't do what they need to do unless the government comes in and hits them over the head with a club.
And I think that's what's happening now with CMMC.
There's the guy that was what's his name? Former CISO of the CIA. His name Bob. He's another Bob. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, he even came out after he left the CIA and is retired and he's independent now. He said some businesses they're just going to have the government come in and require them to do what they need to do. Otherwise, they're just going to continue rolling the dice or play Russian roulette, and hopefully the bullet doesn't go off. But the problem is if you're hurting, sometimes some of these businesses and, well, even government agencies, you end up hurting, like OPM, OPM breach with the government. You end up hurting a lot of people, and there's no repercussions. So
I think that's what caused or at least like some of it caused the CMMC, regulation, the framework. And I think that's trickled. It was first DOD, now it's the rest of the government. Right. And I think it's going to trickle to the private sector. And what's interesting, a lot of vendors said, "Oh, we can't do this," and I think the government was like, "Okay, there's nothing we can do for you. Yeah, if you want to stay in business, even though you manufacture widgets, you still have to have a certain criteria."
The one thing they can do, though, if they're a vendor for the government, they can say, "Well, you have no more contracts. Sorry, either you get up to compliance by this date, or you're done." That's $1 million.
And that's a shock for the entire supply chain because you can have like a contract that has 10, 15 subcontractors that are required to part.
And that's one of the big trends that's coming up right now. I think more and more we'll see not only the federal government, but we'll see larger corporations requiring their vendors to meet certain standards, security standards, if they want to continue doing business. I think we're going to see that. It's going to be necessary. You were talking about some of the supply chain compromises earlier. That I think supply chain compromises is a large trend, along with ransomware and some other things like that. But it may not. Your company may have a high enough standards and good enough risk management where you may be fairly well off the way you're dealing with things right now. But if your vendors don't, and if they have connections to your systems in any shape, form, or manner, you're still out of luck.
Yeah, and I think the reason why supply chain became there's a couple of reasons. One is the people outsource everything these days, unless it's a core business. It just doesn't make any sense, right? To have an HR and all that. And so the attack surface, which using a tremendous supply chain, is now much larger. And then also, some of the enterprises still, really pick up the game and they are protected, but not so much. Their supply chain, which is not as sophisticated. So it's much easier to go through the back door than to go through the main gate. Yeah. So that it causes it. But there are some technologies out there that look at supply chain, but the area is so vast. And I think it's just, as you mentioned, companies don't have MFA. So talk to them about supply chain. It's a little bit far-fetched. Over there, I always say, you're talking about getting a Tesla and they're still taking the bus. They're still not there from a technology perspective. Right. So what's exciting, and we kind of went over time, and I feel like we should do another session, Bob. I think like we're just kind of scratching the surface on this. Yeah. There's so much we can talk about. Any particular technologies that excites you that you feel are going to have major impact in the next few years? We talked a bit about kind of AI assistant technologies out there. Is there anything else that will help us in our goal to become more secure society as a whole?
I think as you mentioned, AI in certain instances, XDR and SOAR, in certain instances. I think those are some of the key things, but for the time being, they're going to have to be paired up with a human to help them out, so they don't go off on a tangent and not find what you really want to be finding. So,
I forgot to ask you before, but in your career path, I always talk to individuals that kind of climbed the way up, but it wasn't always rosy. It was always, sometimes there were difficult conversations you had to do. And did you have to do that, to have difficult conversation with either people that are business owners or that you have to say, hey, listen, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe any stories without divulging any information.
Well, this has happened. Well, when you have to tell certain people that own certain systems, and this could be internal to the company or external, and you say, hey, you're compromised. And they go, well, I can't be compromised. or I've had situations where, well, I've been in IT and it's sysadmin for over 20 years. It's like, I would have known. And you show them all the evidence all of a sudden, and they go, oh, shit. Excuse my French here. But it's like, okay, now next steps. And
so is there stages, like they have stage in grief?
Yeah.
Like, are there stages
I think
in realization?
Usually it's always disbelief at the beginning. It's like, that can't happen. That wouldn't have happened. Or we're, with situations of, oh, we're fully patched or whatever. And I've had conversations just on my own with mom and pop that are running their own websites and stuff. And it was secure maybe a year or two ago, but they haven't done anything since then. And, all of a sudden,
running a WordPress,
some really bad folks are running some bad stuff off the back end of their website, Anyway, those sometimes are difficult conversations, and they just want to. Most of the people, they just want to be in denial.
And then
it takes a while.
Do you counsel them? Do you take them aside and have this, this conversation?
Sure.
How do you counsel somebody that? Because there is this disbelief, but then there's realization that you're right. And then there's a panic, I think, that takes over.
Oh yeah.
And then what? How do you take them by the hand and make sure that they?
I think if you can show them enough information. I know if it's a mom and pop store that has a website, that's a little more difficult situation because they're really clueless. You just have to say some really bad guys pretty much are camped out in the back of your website, and you're going to you need to do something about it now. But at the sysadmin, it's like, we got the power to just cut you off from the network. So why don't you unplug right now, and then you can take care of it appropriately. That's the other thing, too. Some people think that some of these things can be cleaned up. There are a few things that can be cleaned up malware-wise. But when you're dealing with, very high-level cyber criminal and nation-state type stuff, it's embedded so deep. If you really truly cleaned it up, you would destroy part of the operating system. So it's you just have to, a lot of times you have to re-image. And of course, one of the things that scares me now is, and this has been going on off and on for a long time, is where actually firmware gets compromised. And companies are still working on being able to, they're getting better at protecting firmware and being able to detect firmware compromise, but there's still some more to be had over time.
And I would say the majority of the firmware is being written overseas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And without naming names, and that's a problem because we don't know what's on
Sure.
there. And it can be completely all right until it gets triggered, right? So you can have something runs, for 3, 4, 5 years with no incident whatsoever, and all of a sudden,
that's the scary thing is APT type software that embeds and it lays low for 6 months, a year at a time or longer, and it just there's no activity and there's nothing. And anyway,
Yeah. And what about, we hear a lot of, and this kind of leads me to kind of the last questions, and then we'll part ways,
Sure.
but we'll do a part B of this because I'm enjoying myself.
Absolutely.
And so we hear a lot of these breaches on the news, and there's always this, at least sense that we don't hear about everything that's happening. We hear about kind of scratching the surface. A lot of companies either pay the ransomware and just to not report it. They don't involve the FBI because they're afraid of the. How prolific is that? Are we really? Because again, the statistic, we talked about 60%, and then we also talk about how many ransomware happens every 20 minutes or something in the US, right? So is that really that bad, or is it just overblown?
I'm certain there is a certain percentage. I don't know if I want to even go there on guessing, but there's probably more than many know that go unreported and getting taken care of in back rooms and encrypted channels.
Would you recommend if somebody gets hit like that, or at least knows about it enough to? What do we recommend? Like who do you typically call if they don't have an incident response team? Yeah. What were your recommendations?
There are a lot of major, large vendors that deal with incident response, whether it be ransomware or other type of incidents like that of compromise. If you're big enough, I would even put them on retainer so you could get a response within a certain amount of time guaranteed. If you don't do the retainer, you might be at the end of the line and you may have to wait a while, especially if a lot of companies get hit all at once during a particular week. You may have to wait a week or two before you can get somebody out.
It always happens before the long weekend.
Oh, absolutely.
We're approaching window,
I've had stuff happen and it'd be Friday at 4:30. And it's like, whoa, why?
Is it? And does it impact you as well? You have to, I guess you have to be like on call.
Yeah. I used to be on call all the time. Now I don't. Now it has to be really bad before they call me. But because
when you get the phone call, it's really bad.
that are on call now.
So you delegate.
Yeah, I don't have to do that as much, but I do get pulled into certain situations from time to time.
So Bob, if you get the call, you know it's bad.
Most likely, unless occasionally they'll say, Bob has probably seen this before. Let us find out what he has to say. That could be a possibility. Otherwise it could be bad.
So I've talked to people there. The situation was that we're on vacation. They're on at the beach with the family, and they have the laptop and the phone with trying to get stuff done because of an incident. Did that happen to you?
I used to have to carry my work phone when I went on vacation all the time. Unfortunately, I don't do that now.
Not anymore.
I don't. I'm finally at a point because I'm doing more strategy and helping the other groups, their frontline groups with strategy. And
don't you miss the excitement? The days where you're on the ground.
I get enough excitement anyway. I'm able to find enough excitement to keep my heart pounding. So. It's all good. It's all good. I don't need to have it pounding 100 beats per minute for days at a time.
That makes total sense to me. So, Bob, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to hear
probably LinkedIn at first on LinkedIn. If you just do Bob Carver Cybersecurity, Google, DuckDuckGo, whatever, it comes up on the first page. You'll find several pages of unsearched pages if you do Bob Carver Cybersecurity.
Yeah, and you do an amazing job contributing back to the community. You're very prolific in writing and giving back. So I really appreciate from the entire community. I want to thank you for that. Yeah. And then we'll do a part B of this. Yeah. I feel like we can chat a little bit more and maybe maybe unravel some of the current events and things like that. It'd be great to pick your brain on that.
If you want to go into a deeper dive, give me a little heads up.
Yeah, I will, for sure.
All right.
Absolutely. Until then, thank you very much for joining. Much appreciate, and stay safe online
you too,
as well as offline.
Take care.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure.
See you. Pleasure.